So, welcome you again to the video series on BIT individual project interim report writing. So, today we are going to talk about the importance of the introduction chapter, but overall we are going to talk about the importance of the interim report as well as your final dissertation. So, initially let us talk about why this is important. For example, if you have done your Viva really well and you have enough marks to get a A, and if you haven't done a good job of your dissertation, the possibility is that you could get 5 or 10 marks reduced from your dissertation, which might mean that instead of getting a A that you actually should have got, you actually end up with a B or a B minus. So, it is really important that you do your dissertation well. So, the interim report is actually one step in developing your project dissertation. So, the thing about the interim report is it is actually where you start documenting your entire project, and the final dissertation is a continuation of your interim report. So, today what we are going to do is we are going to talk about the common things or mistakes people make, but also how to write this interim report. And the first thing we talk about today is the format of your report. So, if you have been through the BIT project guidelines, you would see that it defines typesetting recommendations on how to typeset your interim report as well as your dissertation. So, the first thing is you need to know that generally to use one type of text, and we generally recommend Times New Roman, but if you are having samples of code, then of course you need to use a different font. So, overall you do your whole dissertation in point 12 format. If you have tables and code listings, you do it in 11 point, and the line spacing should be 1.5 and line spacing for appendix should be 1. Also there is recommendations for left and right margins as well as top and bottom margins. The chapter heading should be in 24 point bold. Now, this is a common mistakes I have seen that most students make, that their chapter headings and their chapter text is the same size. The only difference is that the text is in bold, but make sure that you adhere to these typesetting recommendations and have your chapter headings in point 24 bold, your secondary headings in 16 points, subheadings in 14 points, and if you have any other headings, then you can have them in 12 point bold, and table headings and figure captions should always be in 11 point. And so, that is about the format. So, after the format, after you know the format of developing your dissertation as well as your interim report, you need to know what style I should write this in. The grammar, of course, you have to check your grammar and your spelling, which is very important, because when your examiners find that you haven't done a grammar or a spell check on your dissertation or your interim report, they go into a different mindset, thinking that you are a careless writer. So, this option is available in whatever editor you are using, text editor you are using to develop your dissertation and your interim report. So, it is important that you use this feature of spelling and grammar check to get a dissertation that is has correct English. Then the next point about your writing style is, how do I write this? Should I write this is in first person? Do I write I did something, or should I write it as we did something, or should I write it in the form of a third person? So, generally in academic writing we avoid the term I, because what is important is not what you are, but rather what you did. So, generally you avoid the using the term I. And also what is important is, if there is a situation that you have to use I, then we actually do not use the term I, but we use a term called the royal we, or as in we. For example, a country may have a king or a queen, which is one person. So, it is an I, but when that person makes a decree or makes a statement, he would say we. So, that is why we use the term royal we, but it is still one person making a statement. So, what is important is if there is a situation where you have to use the first person pronoun, then you use the term we instead of I. But generally you do not write we and I in your dissertation. And also the voice that you use, it is important, and generally most of the sentence should be written in passive voice. Now, I will give examples later onwards in this presentation about how you write in passive voice, but certain sentence they could be in active voice. That depends on what is more important that you want to highlight in your sentence. In addition, we also have to think about the tense, whether it is past tense or present tense that we are writing the dissertation. So, this is obvious, like for example, if you have done something, then you need to document that in your dissertation and your interim report as in past tense, because it has already been done. But if it is currently happening, for example, if there is an increase, let us take an example. If there is an increase in the reviews of a particular hotel because you built a new hotel management system, and there is an increase in the number of positive reviews, then you have to say there is an increase or there is an increase happening, which is present tense. So, it depends on whether you have done something or whether something is happening that you use a particular tense. So, I will give you examples again for how you should not use the personal pronoun. You never say I conducted interviews of system users in order to get the requirements. How you would state it clearly is interviews were carried out of system users in order to gather requirements. Then if you look at the active and passive voice examples, you can say in a passive voice, interviews were carried out of system users in order to gather requirements. So, here the important factor is that you conducted interviews. In a active voice, you would say system users were interviewed in order to gather requirements. So, here system users are the more important people that you have interviewed. So, it is important that you balance between active voice and passive voice, but your majority of your statements should be written in passive voice. So, make sure that you follow the formatting guidelines, but also spell check and check for grammar, and also write in the proper use of personal pronouns, the voice and tense in the English language, and which is suited for academic type of writing. Then another common mistake, or how actually it should happen, is page numbering, when you number pages. Now, the important thing about numbering pages is your first chapter, there are several sections in your before your first chapter. So, you have the title page, which is important that you do not number your title page. So, I have seen some dissertations where your title page is number 1, which is unlikely. Like for example, if you go to a bookstore and you look at a book, you never find that there is a number in the cover page. So, your title page is actually your cover page. So, you do not number that page, and after that you start with Roman numerals. So, it is I, which are in simple, and so that will be your abstract, your acknowledgement, your declaration, your tables of content, your list of figures, your list of tables, and your list of acronyms, and any other thing that actually comes before your first chapter. So, that is in Roman numerals, and then you have where your chapter starts. So, the first page of your chapter 1 would be numbered in Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3, the normal numbers we use in our day-to-day life. So, how do you deal with this? The easiest way is Microsoft Word has an option called new section. So, you start your first chapter with a new section, because lots of people, when they develop the initial part of their dissertation, then different chapters. So, they have multiple files for each chapter and each section. When they put it all together at printing time or binding time, they make mistakes. So, you find that sometimes page numbering is all wrong. So, to avoid this, develop one document, but if you want to separate different sections, use new section and then change the numbering style. So, that is the way to go about page numbering. And now we talk about the importance of, okay, how do we actually mark your dissertation or your interim report. So, you actually do not get much feedback on the interim report, but it is important that you know, because the interim report is a continuation to your dissertation, it is important that you know how do we actually mark it. So, the first thing we look at is your cover page, whether you have done a proper job of your cover page. So, the example for the cover page is actually given in your BIT guidelines. So, that has right on the top middle you have the Colombo University logo, and then you have your project title, your index number, your name and your index number in the BIT, and then you have your supervisor names. So, now this is also important, because if you look at the sample title page that has been given, it says name in brackets S. So, it means names, name or names of supervisor, and in brackets S. So, supervisors. So, names of supervisors or name of supervisor. But if you have just one supervisor, just write the name of the supervisor, do not have this bracket S, because it looks very odd. And then you have the year of submission, and finally you have a statement, and on that statement also on one side you have the BIT logo, and on the other side you have the UCSC logo. So, make sure that your title page conforms to this guidelines which are given in the BIT project guidelines. Now, that is also important, because lots of students, they look at previously published BIT dissertations, and the mistakes are cascaded. So, the thing with that is, if you look at two different BIT project dissertations samples, and they have two mistakes, and both those mistakes now come into your dissertation, now you end up with two mistakes. So, the best thing is use the guideline as your guidance to do the BIT project interim report and dissertation. But if you need to get an idea of how this has been done previously, then it is okay to look at them, but do not copy what they have done, because most likely you could be copying a mistake as well if it has happened, because there are no perfect dissertations as such. Then we talk about the title. So, your title should cover an area that is relevant to what you have done. For example, your title should not say something that you have not done. For example, if you are just doing a management information system for company X, then you should say management information system for company X. But let us say you do not have all the management features, then you say something like information system for company X. So, your title should actually match what you have done in your project. Then you of course have a declaration which is given in your given in the project guidelines. So, you need to copy that, write it, get it signed by yourself and your supervisor, and then submit it as a page in your dissertation and interim report. And then what you have next is in your dissertation an abstract. So, right now in the interim report you do not have to worry about writing the abstract, because the abstract is the last thing that you would develop. That is very important, because the abstract is an insight into your project as well as it is an insight into your dissertation. So, it is important that you complete your project, you complete your dissertation, and then finally once you have done everything, you have the results, you have the evaluations, then only you do the writing of the abstract. But however, it is good. So, we will discuss how to write this abstract, because that is also an important part, even though it happens at the end of your project. We have tables of contents. So, it should follow a particular format which we will discuss later. A list of figures and a list of tables, that too will be discussed later, and a list of acronyms if they are applicable in your situation. And then the introduction chapter, what we look at is your motivations and your objectives and your scope. So, those all we will discuss with examples later onwards. So, what is an abstract? An abstract is actually a concise summary of your entire report. So, it would be as if when I read the abstract, as if I had read your entire report and I have a good and a clear idea what your project is about and what you have done and how you have done it and what were the results of your project. So, the outcomes of your project. Now, it is important that your abstract remains one page or less. It should not go over one page, because you do not turn a page to look at an abstract. So, you look at an abstract in one page. In other than that, the abstract should follow the sequence of your project life cycle and your dissertation, because that is natural. So, you would have generally you would talk about your client, because that is important that we know who your client is and what are their core business, what their domain is. Next, you would talk about what is the current system they have, what do they do and how do they do it, and these are all in one or two sentences, because your abstract cannot exceed one page. And then you talk about what is your proposed solution for this, right? What is your proposed solution, and then what is your methodology you approach or methodological approach that you use to develop this system. What are the technological resources you used and what are the tools that you have used, and then finally you have to mention the outcome of your project, what really happened, and that is through evaluation to mention what really happened project. So, let me put an example. I can just read it out to you. So, this is an abstract sample. It is not a perfect abstract sample, but it is something thought of a imaginary project. So, I am just going to read it out to you. Hotel XYZ is a family run hotel located in Unawatuna that creates both foreign that caters to both foreign and local tourists. So, here I am talking about their business or what their business is about. It provides bed and breakfast for guests, but also has its own restaurant that offers an a la carte menu. The hotel receives reservations through online reservation sites such as booking.com or expedia.com via email over the telephone through tour organizers and walk-in guests. So, here I am explaining to you who the client is, right, what they do and how their current system works. So, now I am going to explain in the abstract itself what are the problems they face because of this. The reservations are handled manually by the staff at the reception by maintaining a diary. In addition to being tedious, this manual process leads to delays in confirmation of reservations, double booking of rooms, missed or errors in reservations that lead to dissatisfied customers. The lack of a proper system has also led to insufficient allocation of and utilization of rooms. So, now I am telling you, okay, what are the problems these people have. So, the abstract, I have just covered 2 paragraphs and I am telling you the client, the current system and the problems they face. So, now I am going to talk about, okay, what is the approach I used or the methodology. So, here I say the rapid application development methodology was followed in designing the proposed system through the use of rapid prototyping as requirements needed to be discovered and refinement throughout the development stage. So, here I am telling you the methodology and the approach I took. The system included online room reservation and reservation management, an intelligent room allocation module to provide maximum utilization of rooms, a web portal to promote the hotel, and a link to reservation system, as well as a module to take advanced reservation for meals at the restaurant. So, here I am telling you, okay, what are the features of my system and what the methodology I used to develop. And now the penultimate paragraph says object oriented analysis and design techniques were used for the project and UML was used for modeling the system. The system was developed as a web based system using NT architecture. Apache was used as a web server, object oriented PHP for server side scripting, HTML5 and Bootstrap for interface development, JavaScript and for client side scripting, and MySQL as the database. So, now here I am telling you the technology and the design approach I used. And finally, in the last chapter I say, through achieving the objectives of the project, the system provides an efficient and user friendly reservation system. Since implementation of the system, there has been a 20% increase in business, 25% increase in efficient in room utilization, as well as an increase in guest satisfaction and a drop in complaints and negative reviews. So, this basically tells you how you should write an abstract, and what is good about this is that by reading this I know the client, the problem, the solution, the technology used, and ultimate the outcome of this whole project. So, Professor Gihan Wikramanayaka will talk to you about the rest of the parts of this particular presentation. So, wish you all the best in your interim report as well as continuing your project.
Yeah. Now, we will look at how to create the content page of the dissertation. So, what we recommend is to use the automatic generating facilities that is available with your word processor to create the content page. So, along with the content page, we also create list of figures and list of tables where applicable. So, in order to do that, when you create your section headings in relevant chapters, you need to use the appropriate features, then only it will be able to generate the automatically the appropriate content page. So, then whenever you do any changes, you do not need to worry about regenerating or updating the content page, matter of just regenerating it and replacing the earlier content page. So, there are different options you can select. So, what we normally recommend is to select something that will indent the numbering, and then it will connect with the automatic generated numbers with dotted lines, and so that is the usual type of content page that is usually used. So, when doing that, you need to keep in mind the section headings. So, the sections, if it is in chapter 1, you will start with chapter 1 as 1, and then 1.1 will be the first main section, then it can have another sub level. So, it can go like 1.1.1. So, going as 1.1.1 is like going to 3 levels. So, what we recommend is not to go beyond that when numbering your sections. If you have to go beyond that for certain sections, you use a different numbering system. You can put a heading without a number and bold them, or use ABC or different scheme, so that then it will not come to your main content page. So, that is one thing you need to keep in mind. In addition, you also need to remember, now you have already written the abstract. Now, from the abstract is the first page where the reader will read. So, from that the reader will then want to look for certain features, how you have designed or implemented certain characteristic of the project. So, those things should be locatable in the content page. So, when you select the content page, you need to select suitable headings that will reflect certain aspects or key features of the project. So, you need to keep that also in mind when preparing your section heading. So, when you do that, then automatically your content page will be different to someone else's content page. Now, we have given a guideline that these are the things, chapters you should include, these are the areas you have to discuss within the chapter, but then your discussion varies with the type of project. So, by putting appropriate headings, you can customize and have your own type of content page. So, the same applies for figures and tables, which you will create separately after the content page, a list of figures as well as list of tables. And other than the main chapters, the appendices also you may have appendix A, B, C, and have similar numbers where applicable in the content page. Now, when referring to tables and figures, you need to keep in mind that in the chapters you have to refer to the tables and figures by referring to whatever number. So, for example, any table you include in chapter 1 will start with 1.1 will be the first table of chapter 1, and if it is in chapter 2 then it will be 2.1. So, second table will be 2.2 if it is in chapter 2. So, you need to refer in your paragraph before that table or figure, referring to this thing is discussed in this table 1.1 or figure 1.1, and link your discussion with the table numbers. Then the reader will be able to follow what you have presented in the tables and figures. So, you need to make sure that what you intended to convey from the table and figures and are briefly explained in a paragraph and describe. You do not include just a figure on its own, then the reader will not know what it is supposed to do. So, you need to have a supporting description. So, that is another point to remember. So, when you draw diagrams, use wherever possible appropriate tools, then it will make it easy for you to modify and when you want to do any change subsequently. Tables, the features are there in the word processor. So, you could be able to easily use those features. Then before you start the chapter 1, you may also sometimes have a acronym page, that is you may use various shortened abbreviations. So, if you have used any abbreviations, you need to define them when you use them first in the wherever you use it, but after that you can freely use those abbreviations, but then for the reader to easily locate what this abbreviation means, you should have a list of acronyms just before the chapter 1, and so make sure that acronyms are presented in a alphabetical order. So, that if you want searching for something, it is easily locatable by following the alphabetical sequence. So, those are some of the guidelines with respect to the preface things, that is before chapter 1 whatever you may include in the your thesis, and those pages are usually numbered using the Roman numbers, and then the Arabic letters, page 1 will start with chapter 1. So, chapter 1 basically the idea is to you need to introduce your project, what type of project you are doing. So, your project is usually associated with solving a problem to a client. So, it is good to shortly briefly describe what this client, what the client main business, and what the client's problem, and then using that you can describe your problem, this is the type of thing you are going to solve. So, the reader knows what to expect by getting an idea about the client and the problem you are going to address. Then you need to also briefly mention why you wanted to solve this type of problem. So, some sort of motivation towards solving this type of problem is also good to explain. So, so after briefly explaining the problem, you can also say this is the reason why you selected solving this problem. So, there is some sort of justification why you have selected this type of project. So, once you have done that, you need to clearly define exactly what you are trying to ultimately achieve. So, to do that, basically you may have some goals or aims, project objectives. So, so depending on what you want to exactly describe, basically project will always have a set of objectives. So, so collection of those objectives will achieve your overall goal. So, so you need to mention that clearly, then only the reader will know what you are trying to actually achieve through the project. So, so that is an important part. Then the problem what you select, although you have certain set of objectives, you also need to define the scope, that is although you intend to solve and achieve this objective, but in the real world sense it can be a complex problem. So, then there will be many possibilities. So, you may want to define, okay, because of this limited time you are going to look at only this aspect of the project, because if you take for example, a library system can be borrowing, lending, reservation of books, but then as a library is concerned, they may be also interested how to purchase books, how to inventorize them, and how to do the accounting part of that. So, some of those things you may not want to solve as part of this project. So, then you from your scope you define these are the things you are going to solve as part of the project. So, you need to define the scope, so that the reader knows exactly the boundaries you are targeting in solving the problem. Then you will also at the end of the chapter 1 give an idea about what to expect in the rest of the chapters. So, usually you do a background study, a literature review, then analyze the problem, then you have design, implementation, testing and so forth. So, some idea of that also should be explained as part of the chapter. Next, I will try to elaborate a little bit more on the goals and the objectives. So, goal is generally trying to have a long term vision. So, if you are trying to automate a library, so basically you have a automated solution where the users or the customers of the whatever the solution will be able to make use of these automated facilities and make their interaction with the system will make it easy for them to do their whatever the required things. So, so that is the long term vision. So, to reach that you need to do several sub objectives. So, so like you need to automate the books, you need to automate the members, you may need to automate the borrowing process, reservation process. So, but you may do only some certain selected areas. So, so with the objectives you will identify, okay, to achieve this you are doing these parts, and the rest of the things what you are going to keep for the future or for the future work of this project. And so, your objectives will align with the goals, because when you collect all these objectives only you achieve the final goal. So, so you need to keep that mind, and then when you select the software and try to solve the problem, you will have many different approaches. So, you will at a later stage you will try to have to identify those as well. So, you may look at how others have addressed to solve these type of problems, and then try to select something suitable. So, another thing which I want to highlight is about these objectives. Now, the objectives we usually try to define it as SMART objectives. So, SMART basically has 4 areas, that is we need to make sure the objective is specific, and then the objective should be measurable, and then objective should be achievable. So, if you can't achieve, then no point trying to select that as an objective, and then as well as the objective must have a time base. That is, now you know by July you may have to submit your dissertation. So, in that case you need to achieve your objective by that time. So, you should select objectives in a way that it is time bound and achievable by that time, and you could measure. So, if you are saying that you are going to do something, it should be able to do it in a way that someone can judge that it has actually has happened. So, in order to do that you need to clearly define. So, for example, what I have used here is to upgrade the telephone system by July 31st. So, that means the time bound is July 31st, and so the task is to upgrading the whatever the solution. So, upgrading can be any type of improvement, but then you should be able to measure it. So, to measure we must have something that will be able to judge that it has actually got upgraded or has a improved performance. So, so in the same sentence we continue saying by this date to achieve average client waiting time of no more than 2 minutes. So, the no more than 2 minutes is something that can be measured. So, if the client can achieve something within less than 2 minutes, then that means you have achieved the measurable objective. So, so likewise you need to be able to evaluate and show that you have been able to achieve this. So, so you need to select something realistic. So, so if you think you can't achieve in 2 minutes, then you should not say 2 minutes. If it is going to take at least 5 minutes, then you can put a suitable figure, so that it is achievable target, not just something unrealistic you wanted to say, and then you specifically say that this is what we want to achieve, basically upgrading to achieve this improvement with respect to the service time with respect to this example. So, the each objective you should be able to look in that manner. So, if it is making a reservation in the library, basically you need to see how to link that with respect to. So, basically library will have so many members, all members, if you are doing it through online through electronic form, then we should not be going in a queue like a manual system. We should be able to so many members should be able to do a reservation at any given time moment. So, likewise you should be able to identify and define these requirements. So, the scope with respect to, I mentioned we need to say the boundaries. So, then we will indicate that these areas we are going to handle, these areas we will not try to solve as part of the project. So, initially you may have a big idea, because you need to make sure you have 300 hours of work as part of this project, and so finally, based on how you approach successfully, you may do some variations or adjust the scopes and objectives as based on how you progress, but then ultimately you need to be able to convince the examiners that you have put adequate work which we expect as part of a 1 year individual project. So, so you may consider certain things like time, cost, resources, task to complete, because certain things you may estimate initially thinking you can do this in 1 week, but actually you may take 2 weeks, then you need to do various adjustments. So, so those things may be taken as required. So, you do not, although you have a clear idea of the objectives, scope and things at the beginning, you may slightly deviate or slightly modify. So, those things are possible. So, the interim report is concerned, you will present, now you would have already presented this information at the start. Now, in the interim report also you are going to represent them. So, you can improve it from your proposal and submit, and then does not mean that this will again can get revised when you submit as the final dissertation at the end of the process. So, so that basically what we look at with respect to the introduction related content of the dissertation, and then the dissertation also will have other chapters which will include analysis, design and implementation, testing and so forth. So, those things will be discussed separately by other resource persons. So, my role was basically to help to jointly continue with what Dr. Hakim Yusuf explained initially, and talk about the rest of the introduction part. So, we looked at how the content page is prepared. Basically, we recommended to use the resources or tools available in the word processor to create it automatically. So, which means the sections, subsections you create in the document, make sure you number it in a way that, so there are different type of headings that is supported in the word processor. Once you select those features, then automatically the table of content can be generated. So, when you start chapter 1, make sure you have a section break and start as a new page with a different page numbering, because chapter 1 onwards start with page 1, 2, 3 the Arabic numbers as opposed to the Roman numbers before that. So, that is one of the things, and in between also after the content page we mentioned also about the table of contents and the list of figures and tables. So, those also can be automatically generated if you have followed various guidelines, and so it is always useful to generate and maintain, and make sure to do that. This list of figures tables, you need to have a numbering system and a title, because those titles also must come to the that list. So, use appropriate title that will self explain the figure or the table, and so to create these figures try to use whatever the software tools available. So, there are graphic tools, or if you are drawing some sort of diagram, then there are tools to draw diagrams. So, if you use them, then modifying and maintaining them will be easy subsequently. And also we mentioned of trying to link the tables and figures in the text by referring to them in the paragraphs. So, always say that this figure 1.1 describes this type of thing, and then the reader has some idea about what to expect when they see the figure or the table. So, that is how you present your content, and then we looked at finally with respect to the chapter 1 that has the introduction, and we focused on the goals, objectives and the scope. So, hopefully you got some idea about how to address them, and then you will present the material appropriately.